Basically, now we're gonna go into a good application that we do a lot of work with. Compressors is a really big application for us, whether it be suction control or startup gas on a compressor. Another one that we'll do is on screw compressors. We'll hold discharge pressure on a screw compressor, and again, our valve works exceptionally well. And another probably one of the largest applications as well that we get into, as you can see here, we do on a water injection pump as well as a gas compressor. Both those are kind of set up the same way for this valve here, and I'll get onto this one here in a little bit. But basically, with this one here, it is basically just a back pressure valve. But there's a couple features with our valve that I wanted to touch base with that is a key factor with why our valve does exceptionally well in high differential pressure where cavitation is a real problem. Well, one of our biggest applications that, like I said, that we really got into and found that our valve really shone was in this application where you have a centrifugal pump that requires a certain amount of pressure. Most of them could range from a couple hundred pounds up to 1,500 plus pounds of pressure, depending on what your injection and your formation requires to inject in at. So basically, what we have is these pumps require a certain amount of pressure on them to be within their proper curve. And of course, if they don't have pressure on there, what will happen is this pump will cavitate and cause all kinds of damage to it. So what we want to do is we put a set pressure on there. In this case here, let's say it's 500 pounds. What will happen is this will keep that 500 pounds, which is well within its proper curve. So then what happens is, of course, this is going to an injection well. An injection well is designed to go on vacuum, so it's designed to take water. So typically, if this pump is starting and stopping, what happens is that, of course, this goes on vacuum. So you've got a high pressure on one side and basically zero pressure or vacuum on the other. So what happens is there's a with a valve, when you're creating out much pressure drop, what happens is, and of course it happens across your biggest restriction, which with most valves is your seating area, it cavitates. And basically what that does is it's so much pressure drop that there's little gas bubbles and pockets that are created in the fluid, and they're detonating and they're extremely erosive on a seating area. So typically what will happen is if you've got a conventional valve with a little seat on it, of course it starts to pit that seat. And as soon as you get that little bit of pitting within a very short period, that valve will fail. The beauty of our valve is, and one of the biggest features is this rubber bladder. This rubber bladder in that application, it almost works as a dampener. So it does two things. One, water is very unforgiving. With gas will compress, water doesn't. And what happens is that when these valves, when that pump ramps up, it ramps up very quickly and it hits its pressure very quickly. If that valve can't respond and open up quick enough, what happens is that you get fluid pound, and I've seen it where it'll shake buildings. It's so bad. So basically, what we do with ours is, because it's pressure on pressure, and you can see it's a very pliable rubber bladder. What happens is that valve will open instantly. As soon as that water hits it, boom, it snaps open. So one, it works as a dampener. The other thing is that when it cavitates, again, instead of doing all the damage on your metal seat, which would be the case with most valves. Because we have this rubber bladder here, this rubber, again, will absorb that cavitation, and it stands up exceptionally well in that application. And even to the point of, even if we do get a little bit of pitting, which would typically fail a conventional valve, this rubber is extremely forgiving. So what it'll do is, even though you have small little pits on there, again, which would fail a normal valve, this rubber will still seal around that little imperfections, and we'll still get lockup on our valve. And of course, I've seen this on extremely erosive conditions, where it was so corroded so poorly that the whole first row of cones had almost worn right off. But yet our rubber bladder was still able to get around it and lock up and seal, which again is one of the reasons why we've gone in applications where they'll get a few days out of a valve and they'll erode it away, and we'll last a year with our valve because of this technology. So basically, just to recap, again with our valve, what happens is you have a water injection pump or a screw compressor. It fires up. Of course, whatever you have for a set pressure, it'll be locked up. As soon as this increases above the set pressure, it'll open up and allow it to inject or to flow through it. One of the other applications that we really get into a lot of, and again, as I mentioned earlier, because this is a water injection is a lot of the applications that we get into, and this water injection well is designed to go on vacuum. What will happen is that it can actually, as that water's falling down the well, it can create a large enough vacuum that a lot of these lines, because we're dealing with produced water, is very erosive, very salty. They put a liner in there to protect the line so they get some longevity out of the pipe before it rusts it out and erodes it. But what happens is if they don't have a little valve in there like ours, when that goes on vacuum, it can actually suck hard enough that it'll actually collapse that liner, which is obviously extremely costly, and we want to really avoid doing that. So what they'll do is they'll put one of our valves in there, they'll put a few pounds on it, create a little vacuum breaker, and protect that pipe from collapsing.